It is Friday, November 26th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, then I hope you had a good dinner yesterday. And if you don't, then I hope you had a good dinner, whatever you decided to eat that day. But let's start off, as always, with our PS Plus reminder. The November titles are still available. Grab them, 6 games. What's probably more notable here is the leaked lineup for the December PS Plus games, which we don't really ever have an opportunity to bring this up because almost every month there's a PS Plus leak where it's been very consistent. It's almost always right, but we never really get the chance to talk about it because by the time we do have an episode of LTPS, the lineup is confirmed, and at least for this time around, we can say that the leaked December lineup, it looks like it might be Godfall on PS5 and also presumably the PS4 version as well, but they might lock that to just the PS5 version. Mortal Shell and Lego DC Supervillains, so that would also be for PS4 as well. And that's what we're hearing might be the December PS Plus lineup, which we'll find out by Wednesday, right? So yeah, it seems very believable. If we look at the track record of all the leaked lineups before, it seems like this is probably going to be true, although it's not yet. But Godfall, I mean, if it wasn't just the quintessential launch game where it's very middle of the road, mediocre, you might really enjoy it, or you might just go, I'll play it because it's a launch game, or I'll buy it because it's a launch game, and that's just the identity crisis that game has. So it was a little bit of that, and also thinking in the back of your mind, like, well, I'll just wait until it's a PS Plus game. And sure enough, that's like exactly, how you would see this game, and that's what's happening, so, or at least we think that's what's happening, so this might be your opportunity to finally try it for yourself and see that, yeah, it's kind of mediocre. I spent maybe an hour and a half with it, didn't like it, but I know that for some, if you do like it, they put a lot of hours into it, like 50, 60 plus hours, so that's why we have Plus. If you can try it without, spending a ton of money on it. Which, if anything, Mortal Shell is also something that you might want to try if that is included in the lineup as well. Anyway, moving on to our first story, one video that was published from Wired.com last week, shortly after LTPS went up, so we couldn't talk about this, but it was How PS5 Was Built featuring Mark Cerny. So it was a maybe, 10, 11 minute long video where Mark Cerny broke down various aspects of PS5, like the CPU, GPU, SSD, things like that. And there's nothing all too revealing in there, especially if you've been, following this channel or PS5 news in general, because a lot of this stuff we pretty much already went over building up to PS5 for the past year and a half or so. But there's still some cool little, anecdotes and info in there that was sprinkled in, so we'll just touch on some of those. Like, for example, during the back and forth conversation with developers and what they wanted out of new hardware, they requested a read speed of at least 1 gigabyte per second with an SSD as a standard, and that's where Sony had set a much higher target, where today we know it's 5.5 gigabytes per second. Developers would have also liked to see a 16-core CPU, which Sony said they would be able to do, but that would mean scaling back the GPU. And after a lot of developers heard this, they pretty much backed off right away on that idea, going, okay, if we can't get the 16-core CPU, then 8 cores is fine. Ray tracing was actually something that developers weren't requesting whatsoever, or at least not nearly as much, and Mark suspects that this was likely due to them thinking they wouldn't really have enough performance to do anything really meaningful with it, which by the time PS5 had its first showcase, there were 6 games in there with ray tracing support. One of the custom GPU features that Sony opted for was being able to more easily trace where problems occur, like when a game crashes. So it's much easier to see where a game crashed, why it crashed, how it happened on PS5 versus PS4. Mark Cerny also discussed an example testing backwards compatibility where a multi-million selling game was simply running too fast on PS5. The player character would run at an abnormal speed on PS5 and it would basically break gameplay, and this is where they had to add knobs that would let them fine-tune just how much performance a game could actually handle. And those are just some of the cool little anecdotes that we found in that video. I'm going to link it down below. I highly suggest watching it. It's always fascinating to listen to Mark Cerny talk about anything really for an extended period of time, because he doesn't really do too much on-camera stuff or speeches or whatnot. He's done a few over the years, but just there's not really much there. So whenever he does do public speaking or a video or something like that, it's always worth watching. For a while, most people did not know at all who Mark Cerny was. So hopefully he does more things in front of the camera to talk about his long history in the games business. Next up, if you remember, we talked about the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection on PS5 and PC and how it was rated in Australia, and the update here is that it's now been rated in North America as well. The ESRB gave it a teen rating, so that's expected, and really this is not massive news. It's more a matter of the game is probably going to come out on time, so there's no chance of an imminent delay, or at least we have no indicators of that. The movie comes out in February, so it would make sense there to have the game come out sometime around, mid-February, right next to the movie. I'm just guessing, but that seems to make the most sense. No details on if the PC version will in fact come out after, because Iron Galaxy is doing that separately, so it seems like, at least right now, they're maybe on track to be day and date, which would be nice if you're looking to pick it up on PC. No details on an upgrade program or MSRP, but I'm going to also guess that it's not $70, but who knows with Sony. Probably $50 MSRP would be appropriate, especially because there is probably not going to be an upgrade program, right? Because that's a bit complicated. You've got 2 games packaged in there, so that's just not really going to work, or it's not going to be conducive to a good upgrade path. So they probably won't offer that, but that should be coming within the next 3 months. Moving on, we've got another update about the game SIFU coming out February 8th. Remember, that was moved up. The game's producer, Pierre Tarno, was speaking with Multiplayer First, and he talked about how the game doesn't actually have any difficulty settings whatsoever, at least at launch. They might look into that later, but it's something that you might want to keep in mind here. It sounds like the game actually is meant to be rather difficult, so hearing that it's only 1 difficulty going in might tell you that, if you struggle with the game, or if you struggle with fighters or a combat system or parrying, if you were never good with that stuff, I would caution maybe don't get the game right away or don't pick it up day one, especially for me where I am not good with fighters whatsoever. It looks like a really fun game, but I am so bad at fighters. I will always say this, I button mash. That's just how I get through them. That's where they're fun for me. They just don't click. So depending on when reviews drop and when the game releases, you can make a more informed decision on if the game is going to be for you. If there's only one way to go into it, and if you don't want to get beat up over and over again, I don't blame you. I wouldn't put it past you. You might want to hold off on that. For our next story, Guerrilla Games has recently started a new podcast called the Gaia Podcast, and this will be focusing on the Horizon universe, which Season 1 they're calling it right now, is focusing on Horizon Zero Dawn. So that universe, the characters, probably other various aspects of the game like gameplay, story beats, of course, things like that. Episode 1 already dropped, where it's all about Aloy, so if you want some serious insight into her backstory, how she was developed as a character, things like that, really interesting to listen to. I jumped into it right away. It was really cool. It's one of those things, though, where you don't want to listen to it until you've actually played the game, because there's going to be spoilers in there, so that was episode 1. We're seeing Guerrilla obviously do a lot of, not only community outreach and things like that, but things where it's going to drum up some interest and hype going into Forbidden West. And so I'm going to assume that at some point they'll start treading into that territory where they'll spend more time talking about Forbidden West and detailing some of the more finer aspects of what's going on in that new game. Which, by the way, we did actually get some new info in blog form, not necessarily podcast form, but over on the PlayStation blog, Guerrilla did talk about the settlements in the game, which for the settlements, they'll have their own distinct personality and identity, from how all the tribes act, behave, walk around, interact with objects, so on and so forth. And within the settlements, this is where you'll find your standard affair of merchants and side quests, things like that, to craft items and whatnot. And they also discussed how the weapons and outfits are much more potent and stylish this time around. That's what they say. That the extra perks will have they'll be much more specialized, and those will stack on top of the standard skill tree that we're expecting. So what it sounds like, or at least how they're describing it, is that you can maybe make Aloy, you can fine-tune her to play a certain type of way, versus, say, the first game where, by the end of it, you've maxed out the skill tree and everybody just kind of has all the same things, and it's a little more rigid that way, so perhaps you can really fine-tune the game to accommodate your play style. The crafting system also sounds like it's a lot deeper this time around, with a more varied lineup of resources scattered around the world and the machines that you need to harvest them from. So it really feels like there's just so much more going on versus that last game, where it's great, but you can see the limitations of what they were able to do. So we'll be learning more and more about Forbidden West as we quickly approach its release date next year. Now, moving on to our next story. If you remember last month, we talked about a big PlayStation remake coming out in December, or it was going to get announced in December. This was from the Irish singer-songwriter Ava, where on a local radio station she mentioned she was composing this music with Michael McGlynn and his daughter for what she called a big PlayStation remake, and that's all we had to go on. So it's not quite a rumor because she said these things. It's a radio interview. It's not like it didn't happen. It's more a matter of like, what was she referencing? PlayStation, is that just like a general term for video games, which is very common in Europe, or, is something else going on? Which at the time, a lot of people theorized, okay, maybe Metal Gear Solid, but not really, because prior to the interview, 2 weeks before it actually happened, people also noticed that the Chrono Cross composer on Twitter, Yasunori Mitsuda, tweeted out a photo of Michael McGlynn and his daughter, performing music. So it looks like if you connect the dots, that's what we're getting is probably a Chrono Cross remake, and we have some more validity here where Xbox Era co-founder Special Nick mentioned on a recent episode that he's heard that it is Chrono Cross, and he's not entirely sure if it's he's sure, or he's heard that it's multi-platform, but not if it's, say, coming to Xbox. It's an Xbox themed show, so that's why he's bringing it up. But he assumes that it's probably, PlayStation, Switch, PC, which depending on, how the game gets announced or where, which at the Game Awards, you would assume that it's probably going to be something where it's like, okay, here's the platforms it's on, but if it's usually a press event relating to PlayStation, Nintendo, Xbox, that's where there's always a little bit of uncertainty when they announce a third-party game, because then people wonder, okay, like, is it timed, is it not timed, what's going on, and you have to go to Twitter and go to the publisher's account and see if they put up any sort of official tweet confirming what platforms it's actually going to be on, so that's where it gets a bit confusing. But we should be finding out soon, I guess, and yeah, it probably is Chrono Cross, because people already figured that out, really, which may or may not be disappointing for some, where they would prefer Chrono Trigger. That's an entirely different story, but at least we should be finding out soon, and this might be something where like maybe PlayStation wants to lock down marketing rights, but it will probably be multi-platform. Moving on to our next news story. If you remember last week, we talked about the Activision CEO, Bobby Kotick, where there's more bad stuff coming out about him, unsurprisingly, whether it's misconduct or toxic workplace environment, overlooking all the issues with the company for years. We had that last week, and now this week we have a new lawsuit filed by a former Sony Interactive Entertainment employee where she's alleging gender discrimination. So nothing in there from what I can see when it comes to possibly sexual misconduct or a toxic environment, although I guess this certainly goes in that area where the claims being made right now, dating back to 2015, is that there's gender bias going on in the company where she was in the same position for 6 years, trying to advance, not being given much of any opportunity. When she was speaking with her superiors, they would often prefer to talk to men instead of women, and so there's a lot of claims in there, and they want to try and get it to a class action lawsuit from what I understand, which would imply that they want more people to come out and vouch for their experiences at the company if they're currently there or former. But yeah, this was very recent, filed on the 22nd, right next to all that Activision stuff where Jim Ryan's sending out an internal memo being disheartened about the Activision stuff. And, we had that with Xbox, Nintendo, and throughout their years, they certainly have had lawsuits like this as well. So that's the problem with any sort of major corporate structure where you have thousands of employees. You would like to think that you can start at the top and trickle down, some sort of control there to make sure that the company is really on top of these things, but you need every single person in a leadership role in all those separate departments to do their part, right? To create a safe environment, no gender bias, no misconduct, no toxic environment, but it's just nearly impossible when you've got thousands upon thousands of people. So when you have something like this, it's going to run through the courts, and you would hope Sony doesn't try and throw this woman under the bus or whatever, or say that she's a liar, unless maybe she is, but that's the thing, right? Oftentimes the companies, they're the ones that are probably wrong, but whoever is accountable should take accountability, and that's what I would like to see. SI is certainly not at all, it's not a perfect place by any stretch. I'm sure there are a lot of problems there. This may or may not be one of them, and you just hope that they do the right thing. Next up, it's been recently publicized that certain PS3 games are back online thanks to the efforts of one group called PS1, which stands for PlayStation Online Network Emulated. And for those that maybe remember this, but I actually did cover this at the start of 2021 with Warhawk, because Warhawk was one game where they actually did bring that game back online in a true form. So actually, if you also look back to the 2020 video, Warhawk was back online back then as well, just that you needed the Warhawk Reborn application. I think that's what we did in 2020, and that's where you had to launch an app from Android or iOS, and that's where you can trick your PlayStation 3 into thinking that local play is online play. But since then, 2021 is where they pretty much reverse engineered how these games are handled online, and so for Warhawk it's a game-by-game basis, but for Warhawk they figured it out. And so now it's something where if you just change the DNS settings on your PlayStation 3, this is where you can boot up Warhawk, and the game pretty much acts as it did when it came out, where you're seeing what looks like real servers, and you can even start earning trophies again, and it works in a much more official way, I guess, which it's unofficial, clearly, but it will in essence act exactly as it did 10 years ago, just by changing your DNS settings. That's all you have to do, and it's a really amazing effort by this group. It really is. That's where I also interviewed one of the community members for Warhawk, but the real news here is that since then they have actually expanded to new games like MotorStorm, the first MotorStorm. So I know a lot of you sent this to me. Obviously I'm excited that they got that one back up online, because when I talked to them nearly a year ago now, the effort was to bring more games, right? Like Killzone 2, which that's back online. Calling All Cars is back online. That's a pretty interesting one. They want to do SOCOM, PlayStation Home, which that is probably going to be a much larger undertaking, but there's been some progress on that as well. Trust me, I'm keeping my eyes on it. They're just doing so much incredible things right now for all these games that mean so much to me, and I know for a lot of you it's the same, right? And they're trying to expand to more like SOCOM or even Resistance, right? That's another one they want to do. So we have to get the word out there that, hey, these games are back online. It's very easy. It's not like Excellent Kai or anything where it's kind of a pain to set that up, right? It's not like that. You do it right on your PS3, and it acts pretty much like it did before, with no major repercussions on the surface, because that's the one little thing we have to be mindful of. You're entering in their servers, and who knows what Sony may or may not want to do, if ever, right? I can't speak for that, but it's just a matter of right now it works well. They're making really good progress, and so if we want more renewed interest in these games, I'm telling you now, it's out there, and they're making really great progress, and that also bodes well for how many years we can keep checking out old PS3 games online. I love the effort that this group has done so far. Moving on to our next news story, we have a patent that was recently filed by Sony Interactive Entertainment back in July and published November 18th, so this one is very fresh. But the title of this patent says, and I quote, "Context-based user interface menu with selectable actions," which in essence means the UI's activity card system. And normally with patents, they're like so hard to read because there's so much, verbose jargon in there, right? But this time it's pretty easy. We can see that it's about the UI's activity card system. And a lot of the features being discussed in this patent, it was always my understanding that they were going to come eventually, or at least some of them were planned on day one, which of course didn't happen because PS5, launching and building a new console during a global pandemic was not an easy task, but and we expect PS5 to have plenty of firmware updates throughout the years anyway, so I'm going to assume that we're going to see a lot of this stuff within the next year or so. But this patent does describe certain UI features like being able to pin things to the side of the screen, which we already have today, but it's very limited with trophies, or sometimes unofficially you can pin the web browser to the side of the screen. There's no consumer-facing web browser this time around, but we can see the functionality is baked into the system where you can pin a lot of things to the side of the screen. And so this patent describes having cards built for music, video, having an overlay while you're playing games for, say, music button toggles, or being able to do picture-in-picture with what I would guess is like, say, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, whatever you feel like watching, which would be a great quality of life update. Again, a lot of this stuff, I'm pretty sure it was always planned to be on the way. Also, suspending games to a comfortable state where you can go and do something else while you're using the console, or you want to be able to just access something else, right? It's all about multitasking essentially, and it's all context based on what you're doing. That's what the patent says. So it's a lot of that stuff, which normally with patents, it's like the vast majority of them are weird, silly, obscure. We'll never see them. But this one, actually, from what I gather, is very realistic. So we should actually see this stuff. In terms of an ETA, I would hope sooner rather than later. But yeah, we should be seeing this stuff at some point. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about with you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was another random eBay lot, finally. PS4 and PS3 games, go check it out because there was a very interesting result on the value counter. And then coming up, as always, a Tuesday video, Game Awards. We're still a little bit far away, but there should be some reveals and things there that you hope it's an exciting show. I love Jeff Keighley, I do. He's very passionate about the games business, but he always oversells that show every year, and I can't blame him, but let's hope that this one we've got some really cool stuff to look forward to. But that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.